One of the most powerful features we have in QBOT is the chain feature, and we also have a very powerful trim feature. We use these when we do edge-to-edge quilts, and on the frame right now I've got a quilt top that lends itself to edge-to-edge quilting, and I'm going to demonstrate the chain feature and also the trim feature. One of the nice things about our, in conjunction with the chain feature, our overlay and modify routines, what we can do is do offset nesting without having to save a row 1 or a row 2. We can just bring in a design that is even one element and then chain the element together to make the edge to edge. Then we can quilt it out, advance the quilt, and whether it's a nested version of an edge to edge or an offset nest of an edge to edge, it doesn't really matter. We can handle it with V3. So let's get started. I'm over here at the quilt and I'm going to go into pattern quilting. And I'm going to set my points like I normally would any kind of design. For this particular demonstration, I'm going to go off the edge of the quilt anywhere between 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch. And I caution everyone who does this is if you're going to go off the top of the quilt or sides of the quilt top, make sure that that quilt top is pinned down in some way. Now on this example, I've run a basting stitch along the top of the quilt and I run a basting stitch down the sides so that my hopping foot does not get under the quilt top, and then once the hopping foot gets under the quilt top's on top of it, the needle goes through and then sews the quilt top to the hopping foot itself. And for those of you that have done that in the past, you know what a pain that can be. Even though it's at the edge of the quilt, more than likely you're going to have to cut the fabric to get everything undone. So on my example here, I have basted around the top and the sides. Now there's other techniques that you can use. I suppose you could use some blue painter's tape and just catch the top 1/8 of an inch of the top and of the sides and hold the quilt top down that way, and then after it's quilting off the edges, you can then just peel the painter tape up and pick at it, and that's probably a good way to do it. Anything is better than getting that hopping foot stuck underneath the quilt top. Well, I'm going to choose my points now. I'm going to go around and I'll choose, even though I've lined this up pretty well on the frame, I'm still going to choose a couple of points along the top just to get a general sense of if it's on there in a tilted way or not. And now I'm going to come down the sides and I'm going to be about 1/4 of an inch along the sides. Now one of the things with this edge-to-edge, or with this quilt top and with the edge-to-edge design that I've chosen, I've measured the quilt top and it is about 60 inches, in fact it's probably exactly 60 inches from top to bottom. And the design I've chosen is about 6 inches tall. So when I chain it together, I'll probably expand that to about 6.5 inches, just so that what I don't want to happen is I don't want the design to line up exactly with the blocks. I want there to be a little bit of overstitching over the seams from row to row, just so that it can't possibly look banded when I pull the quilt top off. The point of this edge to edge is just to give an all over appeal to the quilt, kind of a retro modern look to it. And I don't want it to look banded like an inkjet printer where there's one of the inks is not quite right and you see these lines in the printing. So we can do that in V3 when we choose the area. What we'll do is I've chosen my top line and I'm going to come down just a little bit below. I'm going to watch the numbers on the screen and I'm going to look for about 6.5 inches down on my delta Y, and I'm going to see how that lines up with the quilt as well. So I'm going to come down here and I'm just going to go past a little bit. It says about 7 inches actually, and that's because I went up about 1/2 inch above the top of the quilt. So I'm going to do that 7 inches. I'm just going to I'm going to say, yep, if you look at my delta Y there on the screen, right in this area here, if you look at that delta Y, you'll see that I'm at about -7. I'll set that point. And I'm going to just run across the quilt and come back again and set this point at 7 inches down. So my delta Y now is pretty close to 0, like that, and I'll say done. Oh, actually, I'm sorry, I need to say set point, because I'm really not done yet. What that will do, those selections I've chosen, that's going to select the area for the first edge to edge. And these are just guidelines. What I also want to do is select a boundary that shows how much I can quilt in one pass, or in several passes with one machine. So in one hooping, we'll call it that, in one hooping, how many passes I can get in. So I'm going to look at the boundaries of my sewing machine right now, how far it can move front to back. And I'm going to move up again just because this will show nicely when I press done. It will draw the space nicely. I'm going to go down a little bit, down to here, set a point, come across. And this is as far forward as I want to come, because I've got clamps on I've got side clamps on the edge of the quilt, and I don't want to bump into those and have things shift, so I'm avoiding all of that. I'm just overall giving the general quilting area the total space that I can quilt on this quilt top. Again, this really is not important to QBOT, because QBOT doesn't use these points to calculate anything. It just uses them to show on the screen the quilting area. So I'm going to set this last point and say done. And there you can see my quilting area. You see the top band, which is how I want to size the first row, and I'm going to use that as my general sizing for the quilt design. And then I'm going to save that at that size, just so that when we advance the quilt, I don't have to recalculate anything. So we're going to go through all of those steps. I'm going to go to all my designs, and I'm going to search for a what is it? I think it's a JLS Panto. Say OK, and there it is. There's that design, and it's kind of a neat, modern, retro design. And I got this from Digitech Design, so check them out. Now, this, because it brings it in and it's automatically sized to the size that you see on the screen, it's not the correct size. We need to resize this, and then we're going to chain it. So I go into my modify routine, so I press modify, and now I scale this down. So I just use my 2 fingers and I scale it, and I place it in right about there. And I look at it, looks pretty good. And I'll go over just a bit. And that probably looks okay. I will nudge it down just a little bit and maybe scale it down to 1/18%, I guess. That looks good. Now, this is only one element. Now I need to chain this to repeat it across that area. So what I do is I press the chain button, which is right here. I'm going to press it now. It's in between the magnifying glass and the trim button. I just keep pressing chain, and you can see it's just chaining it along. And you can start out with any size. Seed, I call it. It's just a seed, and then you can hit repeat and chain. And we'll chain it one more time for good measure. Now if you look at the top of very top of the quilt, there's a little bit of empty space up in there, right in this region here, right at the top, in those little regions that I don't like so much. So I'm going to move it up just a bit. I'll nudge it. I'll nudge it just like that, just to make sure we get that covered and it looks good. Now when I've done that, you can see that I haven't gone to that past that bottom barrier. I haven't met that bottom line, so I'm going to expand it just a little bit. I'll increase it in size just a bit and maybe nudge it down. So that's the overall look that I want to have. Okay, so we're done sizing it. We've chained it together. That's kind of like what I like. So let's quilt this out. All right, so we press done. Actually, we need to go back and modify one more time, and we need to turn on the trim. We're going to trim it left, top, and right. And then we say OK, and now we press done. Now what the QBOT has done is it's automatically trimmed to the sides and the top. One thing that we want to do now, though, is we want to save this pattern. So we're going to save it, and I'm just going to name it Edge to Edge Demo. Say OK. Now what's really great about QBOT V3 is when it saved that design, it saved the untrimmed design. So when it comes time to do the next row, after we've advanced the quilt, we can open up this design again, set the scale to 100%, and the whole design will be there. And if it's a little bit, if it's an offset nest, if we have to offset it, we can still chain it. So all of the raw information is still held in the design. So this is a very, very powerful thing. Now I'm going to move to the start point, and we'll quilt this out. And press go. So because we were able to trim it, we're not wasting a lot of thread outside the boundaries. We're really very precise. We've gone full edge to edge plus just a little bit, and we don't have to worry about excess stitching outside the boundaries. One of the nice things about this design is, actually it's the nice thing about the design plus the thread I'm using a variegated thread, is that the thread colors, each of the thread colors in the variation that's on the thread matches one of the fabrics really well. So it really has a nice effect, an overall effect to the quilt, and it complements the quilt quite nicely. All right, we're at the end of this first row. So I'm going to pull up my thread, trim it, and then we'll move on to the next row. Now the way we do that is over here on the left-hand side of the screen, we see overlay, well, we see at the top, save pattern, another chain, overlay, and exit. We're going to press overlay, then modify, and we're going to now pull the design down to do the next row. Now one thing you'll notice is that if you look to the left and right edges and also the top, the area that we had trimmed in the previous row magically reappears. So we have the whole design redrawn for us so that we can position it properly for the next row. So let's do that. Let's go in here, and I'm just going to look at this. I'm going to zoom in just into the area. I'm looking at where these two designs will nest. I'll unzoom, and then I think I like it just about like that. I like it just about like that. It doesn't look like, I don't see any banding. They kind of nest up into each other, and it looks good. So I will double tap the screen to go back to my full size, and I then press my trim button, and I trim on the left and right one more time. I press OK, and then done. And then I press move to start. And we're ready to do the second row. I'll pull up my bobbin thread and press go. And again, as it's quilting, starting at the left and it's about to go into the field of the quilt, I'm glad that I used the basting stitch to stitch down that left-hand edge. I don't even have to worry about it picking up and getting the hopping foot underneath the quilt top. Now I can see that I won't be able to fit in my next row using this same technique. So stay tuned, we're going to let this quilt out, and when we come back we're going to advance the quilt and pull in the design again, choose the area one more time on the quilt frame, pull in the design one more time, and then we'll get quilting again, and then we'll nest and continue just like we've done here. Okay, so we're at the end of the second row, and now's the time to panic, right? No, we don't need to panic. We need to advance the quilt and then continue quilting down our edge-to-edge design. So I'm going to trim my thread here at the end, pull up my bobbin thread, and trim it. Undo my clips, which are my side clips here. And then advance the quilt. So depending on your quilt frame, you release the rollers, depending on which quilt frame you have. And then advance the quilt. And I like to look and see how much space I have. I can go up about that far. That gives me just the right amount of room. So I'm going to hold it there. Apply tension again. Put my side tensioners on. At least one of them. I'm going to do a basting stitch now. I have to do the basting stitch down the right and left hand sides. You don't want to forget about that and lose all the good work that we've done so far. So I float my quilt top. I just float that in. That way it allows you to do any kind of easing that you may have to do as you're quilting. I'm looking at the lines of the piecing. I'm not too worried about the edges coming in and out, because sometimes they're going to be a little bit wonky anyway because they're the free edge. I'm worried but I look at the inside lines because I want those inside piecing lines to remain straight. I don't want to start out at the top and have these beautiful lines, and then as we start rolling it, they start to waver in the middle of the quilt. So I'm sighting down those to make sure that those are eased in nicely. because that's what matters when this thing is hanging up somewhere in a quilt show or something like that. You don't want to be drawn to the piecing lines being all out of whack. So on my frame here, I can go into a basting stitch. If you don't have a basting stitch on your quilting machine, don't worry. Just turn the stitch length up, make it larger. But remember, if you make the stitch length larger to do your basting, remember to turn it back down to the correct stitch length when you stitch out the quilt. Okay, so let me just baste this down. And I'm very careful on this. I don't want to rush this and then get puckers. I just want this to look correct. And if I miss it like I did there, I'll just go back and grab it. You really don't need much to hold this edge down. You just need to make sure that you get it. And we'll ease that in, just like that, right to the front. And pull up that bobbin thread. Pull up that bobbin thread and give it a trim. I hear a little bit of squeakiness in my bobbin case. As I was pulling that up, I heard a little squeak of that bobbin. So I haven't oiled my bobbin, the race, not the case itself, but I haven't put a drop of oil in that area. And depending on your machine, if that hook area loses lubrication, boy, that's going to howl and give you a lot of problems. So you might want to look at that. I think what this is right now, though, is not that. It's my bobbin. I have an aluminum bobbin rubbing up against a metal spring. And you don't want to put oil in that area because then the oil can get into the thread. So I just heard it. You can hear it too. I'll just pull this thread up. You can hear that there. That's not the bobbin race or anything like that, so I'm not going to worry about it, although probably after we do this quilt, I will do some maintenance down there. Just have a little bit of noise in the bobbin itself, and that's not going to hurt anything. So let's come down here, and we'll continue our basting stitch as well down this side. There. Super easy to do. And we're done with that. Now, like I said before, go back and change your stitch length back to the way it was, to your liking. And here we're ready to exit on the screen. So let's look at the screen now. We have the same choices. We can save pattern, another, chain, overlay, and exit. Well, we want to exit now. Now we need to select the area for the next rows of quilting. So we'll do that. And one of the things that we can do in QBOT is select part of the previously sewn out row. We just follow the stitching on the previously sewn out row. That will be our upper edge to our area, and it serves as the guideline for us to nest the design that we're about to place. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to be off the edge of the quilt about the same amount. Just look at that, make sure that I'm off the edge of the quilt the same amount. I go into pattern quilting, and I set a point, and then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to pick up the feature of the previous quilting. And I'm going to do several of these features one at the left-hand side, one at the right-hand side, and one in the middle. So here's that first feature. And because I know I nest into this area here, this is the particular area that we nest into, I want to make sure I capture it. This could be a little bit tedious, but the way I view it is it's better to do this in a calm way, knowing that you're doing it correctly, than to do it fast and then quilt out something that you may have to rip out later. So that's my left-hand side that I'm going to look at. Now I'm going to do another section right here. I'm going to pick this up right here in the middle, set my points. And I'll set more points closer together when I'm doing the curve, just so that it defines the curve nicely. And I'll grab this other curve, and this will suffice as my center that I want to meet up with. And then I'm going to come to my left-hand edge, and we're going to come up to right here. All right, so we're just about done with that, and then I'll come over to my left-hand edge, or my right-hand edge, and then I'll come down all the way to how far I can quilt, and I'll make sure that I have my little clip on there. I can come comfortably down to here. And I'll make sure I have my clip on this side. I'll see where I can come to here. Right about this level here. Set point, and then we'll say done. So there you can see at the top edge, you can see how the top edge of the area I've chosen, you can see the features that I want to line up with. I want the design to line up with. So let's put the design in. So I go into saved pattern, since I saved it there, and I used EE demo. I modify it again, and it came in at 87%, so we want to click on that and make it 100%. And we can line it up just like that. You can see how it lines up. I'll nudge it down and over. You can see how nicely it fits there. And we don't have that much rotation, so that's really good. So let's nest it then, just the way we did before. We will nest it just like that. Looks good to me. Maybe bump it over just a bit. That looks good. We will trim it to the left and right. Press OK. Say done. And move to the start point. Pull up our bobbin thread and press go. So we're on our way. We've done the first 2 rows, and it didn't matter how it nested. In this particular case, it's just a slight offset nest. You may have designs that are a full repeat kind of thing where you have to nest the next row by going over maybe a half a repeat, or yeah, I guess it would be a half a repeat. A full repeat would be the same as just pulling it down straight. But it doesn't matter with QBOT. You can do that at any time because between each row it always maintains the full pattern that you've chained together, and it doesn't trim it. It only trims it when it quilts it, but when you need to modify it, do an overlay and modify, when you bring it down, it redraws the whole design all over again, so you can shift it left and right to get those, whether it's just a straight nest or an offset nest. You can do that no matter what. And if it's too short on the next one down, the next row that you quilt, if there's not enough, you can always press the chain button again and add, it'll chain onto it one more time. Then press the trim function and trim the edges. So as this is quilting out, we'll come back to this. While this is quilting out, let me show you some other neat things that you can do with the chain feature. One of the really neat features with the chain feature and the trim feature on V3 is that we're not pinholed into doing just horizontal edge to edge. The chain feature in V3 is universal and it's simple. So if you have vertical sashings or just strips that you want to do at, say, any angle, but say a 45-degree angle, it really doesn't matter. You can chain along the angle of the design. So let me show you what I'm talking about. We're upstairs at our facility in the manufacturing warehouse portion of our building, and I've got this new small frame, which is it's a fixed width frame. It's at 5 feet wide, and there are no take-up rails. It is kind of a bridge between free motion quilting using your hands and a long arm quilting machine. So instead of having the take-up rail inside the bed and the feeder rails in the front of the bed here, we just have a platform where it looks like a rail in the back, but it's a stationary rail. It doesn't roll anything up, and as you just move the quilt and then clip it down in sections. Well, when you're doing that on these types of frames with the smaller mid-arm machines, the chances of you getting that quilt exactly aligned to the X and Y axis of the carriage system is next to impossible. So we don't even worry about that with V3. It's this flexible. So what I've done is I purposely put on a little project on this frame. It's a wall hanging for spring, and I'm going to show you doing a sashing or a very thin strip using the chain feature. And I've just placed it on here not quite randomly. I purposely put it at an angle. So let's take a look at it here on the frame. I'll show you through the needle cam. I've got my strip going along here, and it's this blue strip we're going to quilt into today. And I don't have any borders on the side of this here, so I'm going to be very careful when I'm at the edge. And in fact, I'll probably not stitch off of the edge because this still has to be bound. And as long as I'm 1/8 of an inch or so within the boundary, that'll be taken up in the binding, and I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to worry about it when I bind it, and I don't have to worry about it now when I quilt it out. So let's set some points to do our boundary, and I'll get used to this. I have to bend down a little bit to see where the needle is, and you may find this as well. It's sometimes convenient just to put the needle down just before it touches the fabric to set your boundary points. And on this one, I also have the benefit, and I'll zoom in here a little bit onto the foot. If I have my seam between my fabrics here, if I put my seam just inside that inside radius, that's about 1/8 of an inch or just over 1/8 of an inch gap between the seam and where the quilting would be. And traditionally that's what I do. Instead of putting the needle on the seam and using the seam as my true boundary, because I don't want to mess up. I definitely don't want to go into the other fabric, especially when it's a very stark difference between this blue fabric and the lighter white fabric on the top, above and below it. So let's set some points. I'm going to use this as my right hand boundary. And because I know that this is got some movement to it, I'm going to just go along and set plenty of points to define it. So we'll set all these points. I'm going about 2 inches. And you know, if you have and I'm doing it at 2-inch intervals or thereabout, just because there's such a dramatic angle on this. And I'll come up here, not quite go to the edge, and then I'll make the return trip here. All right, that looks good. Now you can see how wonky that shape is. All right, let's put in an edge to edge that we want to fill that space with, and let's do something that's a little bit open. It's not going to be too dense when it's quilted out, and I don't want to necessarily do that meander. So let's say we'll do this button flower design, and there you can see it's in, and it's obviously not going to fit that way. We have to modify it. So we modify it, shrink it down, and then I'll move it over here and I'll rotate it a little bit. So there it is rotated, and now let's chain it along that line. There it is, chained. And I'll rotate it just a little bit more. And let's see if I can go a degree. No, let's go minus 3.5, yeah, minus 3.5 degrees. And we'll nudge it around. This might be the best we can do, because not only is this on an angle, but it's also a little bit warped. So let me go to minus 3.6. And you know what? Sometimes you get quilts like that. This is probably a pretty good example of what can happen. And we're going to trim it on the left and right sides. And because my trim is really going to end up in the seam allowance of the binding, I'm not going to worry about that sharp edge that's going to happen at the left and right angle. I press done, and there it's all trimmed and ready to go, and I'll move to the start point. Now here on this machine, I don't have the benefit of push buttons to put the needle down and pull it up and draw the bottom thread up. And a lot of you may have this same kind of, it's really not an issue, it's just the fact of what you have to work with on your particular machine. The way I do it on this one is I'll put the presser foot down. I also have to remember that, and rotate it by hand and pull up my bobbin thread the good old-fashioned manual way, and then I hold it off to the side. Now also on this machine, I don't have a connector cord between the QBOT head and the stitch regulator to turn it on. So the way we do this now is I'll press the button on the stitch regulator to turn it on, and then I'll press go on the tablet to start moving the carriages. I've also set the setting for this in my settings menu. This is the machine on delay, and I've set that to 200. So that's 200 milliseconds or 0.2 seconds after I press go, then the machine will start going. That way I don't get a huge knot at the beginning of my quilting. So I press go here and then go on my tablet, and then we're off to the races. This design I didn't even think about this, and that's just luck, I guess, but this button flower design actually goes pretty well with the flower theme or the garden theme of this little wall hanging. So I got lucky there. I'll stay out of the doghouse for that. Now I'm coming to the end of this design, and I have to remember that I have to shut off my sewing machine independently of QBOT. So I will wait until it gets to the end, and then QBOT will it will hold the carriage still, and then I need to press the button right here to turn it off. So we're off, and then I press the button off, and we're all done. So this is a really nice feature, being able to do the chaining without having to look at the angle that you're doing, I guess is the best way to say it. It's really a universal function, this chain function, and then you can add on the trim at the end to trim it to size. So just to highlight that one more time, I'm going to pull up my bobbin thread and clip it, and then I'm just going to go through a dry run showing what that vertical chain would look like. So I'll say exit here, and then back into pattern quilting, and let me just choose some points. The points don't matter here. I'm just going to choose something that's more of a vertical shape, like that. So here I have something that's a vertical shape, and judging by the shape of that boy, that's a crazy looking sashing. So maybe you'd have to look at your piecing technique just to get that a little bit straighter, and if it were your quilt. But here we have that vertical sashing, and I want to do an edge to edge or something like that. And edge to edge really just means an element, a design that has a beginning and end point that are on the same horizontal coordinate. So let's do something silly where we say we just have maybe a singular or double element like this, these two hearts. So I want to modify it. I'll shrink it down kind of like this, and then I want to chain it, and there it is, chained. It's just that easy. You can chain it and you're good to go. So I hope that helps, and we'll get back down to the other quilt that's quilting out right now. We'll finish that up, and you can learn a little bit more about the chain feature and nesting. Okay, we've come to the end of our third row, and we're going to do one more nest and get it going, and then we'll call it good for this part of the video. So now, just like we did before, I'm going to do an overlay and then a modify. And I'm going to pull it down, it's free forming with my finger right now. And I want to show you something, just to be clear. What happens if my design I had to offset it like what I've shown on the screen here? I have to offset it this much and to get it to work correctly, for the correct nesting for the particular design. And I'm going to nudge it over and get things aligned the way I did before. So it looks about like that, I think. But what do? Well, in QBOT V3, all you have to do is press the chain button. It chains it right to the end there. Turn on our trim, left and right, OK. And then say done and move to start. It's just that easy. So it doesn't matter as long as you have an edge to edge with a beginning, start point, and end point that are on the same horizontal line, which most designers do, if not all designers. They know that if you're doing an edge to edge and they want to make an element that you can then grow or chain together, they all start at the same height, okay? So you really don't have to worry about that, but if you're designing designs yourself and if something's going a little bit crazy and you don't know what it is, just know that your starting node and your ending node have to be on the same level. Now, QBOT V3 will, if they're not on the same level, QBOT V3 will still chain it together, but as you start chaining it, you're going to notice that there's going to be some drift one way or the other, and you're going to have to rotate it back. So it's always better practice. The best practice is to have your start and stop node at the same level. I'm going to get this quilting one more time, pull up my bobbin thread, press go. And we'll get this quilted up today and get it all bound up, and either on the chair or on the wall, one way or the other, we'll get it done using QBOT V3. So enjoy this feature, enjoy the chain feature, enjoy that trim feature, and until next time, happy quilting.